Jesus Christ. I've rambled on for the last 10 minutes and then looked to see that I hadn't actually hit record. How typical. What a typical way to end 2025, or, potentially if we don't get to do a show next week before the new year. Good evening, ghouls and fiends. Welcome once again to another edition of the Ministry of Horror. I'm your host, Tez. And I will briefly repeat what I'd sort of just been saying to myself because I'm an idiot and clearly can't look to see if I've actually hit a button or not. But this is potentially the last show of 2025. We're 22nd of December as at time of recording. And it's one of the things I'm looking at for next year is sticking to a schedule. Returning to doing live streams on a more semi-regular basis. I'm thinking either at least monthly, if not twice weekly, or twice monthly, whatever. Twice a month. But recording weekly, getting the regular content out, because it's the motto for 2025 has been hella busy. Because it has been hella busy. This is the year I've got married. It's the year I went on my honeymoon road trip. Coming straight back, getting ready for Christmas. Straight after that, we've got a UK party to get ready for. It's just been one thing after another. Generally incredible times. Not complaining, but it has meant focusing on regular output for the Ministry of Horror has been a bit more difficult. So we are going to look to rectify that, in 2026 for sure. Gaming wise, not played too much recently. I've been playing Octopath Traveler, the first one, on my Switch. I have been looking at potentially getting a game called Clock Tower Rewind. Clock Tower is a series I've never played before. I think it was initially just like Japanese only releases for I think the first entry, but it was one of the early survival horror series like Alone in the Dark prior to Resident Evil, I believe. So potentially trying that, but I haven't really done much horror gaming. Chipping away at Alan Wake 2 as and when I have time. Kind of the standard gumph. In terms of today's show, now I had mentioned on the last show, I believe it was on the last show, that I had intended at that point to do a review of It, Welcome to Derry, and then also talk about Pennywise and his various iterations and adaptations against the Stephen King source material and what differences there may be. But at that point, I hadn't realised that I had one more episode of It, Welcome to Derry to go. I sort of thought episode 7 was the finale, but no, not quite. And in the last week, I just hadn't been able to get time to do a recording. So I knew today I needed to get a recording done. I needed to get a show done and out there. Only to wake up to the tragic news of the passing of actor James Ransone. So we're starting off with a bit of news, but incredibly tragic news. James Ransone, known for being in a number of Scott Derrickson films, the Black Phone series, Sinister 1 and 2, and of course playing the adult Eddie Kaspbrak in It Chapter 2, which I'll talk about It Chapter 2 a bit later on when we get to the featured presentation. And incredibly sad news. So it had left me sort of thinking, well, do I just sort of ditch the review of It, Welcome to Derry and the discussion on, it and its adaptations? Because that may look like it's bad taste because of doing a discussion on that when one of the big characters, or the actors portraying one of the big characters, is obviously just passed away. It's, it's one of those things. The last thing I'd want to do would be do a show that looks like it's in bad taste. But it is something that I had planned, like a week ago or so, and I'd either mentioned it on the prior show or at least mentioned it on the Discord. Discord is something we're going to look at in the new year because at the moment the show is kind of buried underneath the banner of the Wrestling Arena, so it makes it difficult to push it as a platform for users to engage on, because it's not the Ministry of Horror Discord, it's the Wrestling Arena Discord, the Ministry of Horror sub-channel. It just, and the Wrestling Arena has been defunct or inactive, for a long time. So, and we've not been associated really with the Wrestling Arena for a long time, just because we've been doing our own thing for a long time. So that is something I need to look at and start building out from there. So that's a little project for the new year. Anyway, but yeah, we will be talking a bit later on about the original plan, but it'd be remiss not to obviously say that it's such tragic news. The cause of his passing, I won't say because of streaming platform rules and podcast rules and demonetization, even though this is monetized. But if you are suffering, if you're struggling, if you're having certain thoughts, there is help out there. There are helplines. You can that people will listen. You can seek help. Don't don't think you're alone. Okay, so we're gonna start with the horror news as per usual. Starting off with bloodydisgusting.com, where we get all our horror news. Great site, check them out. Friday, December 19th, Friday just gone, the 9 new horror movies released this week from John Squires. Starting off with the Emmy-nominated creators, the Boulet Brothers, are gifting fans with the Boulet Brothers Holiday of Horrors this Christmas, and it's now streaming on Shudder. The anthology film features 4 original shorts from Swathula and Drakmorda Boulet, Late Night with the Devil star David Datsmalchian, Malignant and Megan writer Akilah Cooper, and The Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass actress Kate Siegel. Gaudet is written and directed by the Boulets and stars Bonnie Aarons, Aaron Abrams, Brianna Venskus, and Elucia Huggins. After inheriting their grandmother's old house, a family attempt to settle in on Christmas Eve. But as strange sounds echo through the halls and tensions rise, an unseen presence forces them to face a chilling secret buried within the home. Yeti or Not is directed by Datsmalchian from a script he co-wrote with Leah Kilpatrick and Jennifer Polania. Datsmalchian plays the Yeti along with Lauren Levera, Jennifer Polania, and Leah Kilpatrick. 3 close friends embark on a wilderness search to find their missing sister and friend. What they discover in the snow-covered wild is something more terrifying and inhumane than they could have ever imagined. Old Acquaintance is written and directed by Cooper and stars Tracy Thoms and Tiffany Smith, Charles Murray, and Abhora. Along with Down the Chimney, written and directed by Kate Siegel, and features the voices of Dominic Hugh, Theodora Flanagan, and Cody Flanagan. So, I've never watched the Boulet Brothers. I believe it's like a horror version of RuPaul's Drag Race. Never seen that either. There you go. Moving on. Said to be in the vein of Jordan Peele, Afraid? Is now available on VOD. The movie is written and directed by Sky Directs. 5 daring teenagers head to the woods for a Halloween weekend getaway. What begins as an innocent table game called What Are You Afraid Of? Quickly turns deadly. Kendra Berry, Tierra Mari, Lil Fitz, and Nakosha Briggs star. The horror movie soundtrack includes X Moves by DMX featuring Bootsy Collins, Steve Howe and Ian Pace, Work That by Selma Slims featuring Too Short, and She Likes by Pleasure P, so on and so forth. Not much to say on that. Moving on. A brand new New Year's Eve themed horror movie from producer Jeffrey Reddick, New Fear's Eve, is now streaming exclusively on Screenbox. In New Fear's Eve from directors PJ Starks and Eric Huskisson, when 3 co-workers are forced to host their company's annual New Year's Eve party, they're not prepared for an unexpected guest. A serial killer dubbed the Doctor who targets the party and turns the night of celebration into a bloodbath and fight for survival. The cast includes Felicia Rose, Dave Sheridan, Hannah Fierman, Lily Claire Harvey, Jay Woolston, Alicia Rhodes, Ronnie Jonah, Turner Vaughan, and Jess McDonald. I mean, it's a new slasher. The mask looks interesting. Like, it does look a little bit cheap and nasty, but we don't really have New Year. I mean, we have, horrors for most holidays, but do we have a New Year's Eve one? I mean, it's a party environment, a whodunit. It's kind of ripe for it. And obviously, in the last year, we've had Heart Eyes, the Heart Eyes Killer, a killer set around Valentine's, which was a bit of a disappointment, I must say. So, why not? Why not have New Year's Eve? New Fear's Eve. Well, give it a go. Next, the explosive action event of the year sequel Sisu Road to Revenge is now available on digital at home. Writer-director Jalmari Helender is back at the helm, steering this carnage-fueled sequel into the over-the-top excess. In the sequel, returning to the house where his family was brutally murdered during the war, the man who refuses to die dismantles it, loads it onto a truck, and is determined to rebuild it somewhere safe in their honour. When the Red Army commander who killed his family comes back hell-bent on finishing the job, a relentless eye-popping cross-country chase ensues, a fight to the death full of clever, unbelievable action set-pieces. Richard Brake also stars in the mega-violent action thriller. I hear a lot of good things about Sisu and Sisu Road to Revenge. I haven't seen either. I remember seeing a trailer for the first Sisu film, and both me and the wife liked the look of it, but it just sort of then from that point on flew under the radar. But yeah, I enjoyed Rare Exports. I haven't seen Big Game. Yeah, I will check it out. I will. While the new Anaconda reboot goes for comedy in theatres next week on Christmas Day, the Asylum's latest mockbuster, The Anacondas, echoes the franchise's creature feature roots. I can't be asked to read that. I can't be asked to read about an Asylum film's release. It's just a knockoff of, I'm not giving it the time of day. If you like those sorts of films, cool. More power to you. Next, it's said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But what happens when sinister forces want the past to be the present? That's the premise behind The Plantation, which appears to be a socially charged genre film in the vein of Get Out. The horror thriller is now available on VOD from Quiver Distribution. An interracial couple takes a backpacking trip deep into the Louisiana swamps, where they encounter sinister forces at an old plantation hell-bent on turning the past into the present. Liz Lefontant, Brendan Lessard, Devontae Wilfrey, Bailey Tony, Robert Clohesi, and Christina Klebe star. Miles Wyatt Clohesi writes and directs the horror movie The Plantation, in addition to producing alongside Anthony Ware, Ramsey Heitman, Rob Simmons, and Mike Walsh. Okay, I mean, it's a socially charged genre film in the vein of Get Out. Get Out was incredible. I'm not too familiar with those involved, although it does say Liz Lefontant was in Kilroy Was Here. Now, if that's... Oh, okay. I was initially thinking Killjoy, the Killer Clown series, but Kilroy... That's different. I hope so, anyway. Next up, indie psychological thriller No More Time has also infected VOD today. The film follows a couple that seeks refuge in a remote mountain town to escape a mysterious disease that makes some people disappear and others turn into hateful murderers. Strange figures begin to emerge from the surrounding forest, unclear if they are helping or harming. As the stakes grow higher and the dangers draw closer, the couple must decide who to trust and what they are willing to do to survive. Writer-director Delilah Droeg makes her feature debut on the project. Jennifer Harlow, Mark Reeb, Tunde Adebimpe, David Sullivan star with Amy Seimetz and Jim Beaver. Jim Beaver from Supernatural. I've seen that. Not all of it, but I know who he is. There you go, cool. Moving on, Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried play a seductive game in psychological thriller The Housemaid, now playing in theatres nationwide. Paul Feig directed The Housemaid. In the film, Millie, trying to escape her past, accepts a position as a live-in housemaid for a wealthy family. What begins as a dream job quickly unravels into something far more dangerous, a sexy, seductive game of secrets, scandal, and power. Rebecca Sonnenschein wrote the script based on Frida McFadden's novel of the same name. Brandon Sklenavar, Michelle Marone, and Elizabeth Perkins also star. I wouldn't mind watching the film, It's a good director. Yep. A catastrophic world-ending flood creates an intense fight for survival in the Korean sci-fi disaster movie The Great Flood, which is now streaming exclusively on Netflix. In the film, when a raging flood traps a researcher and a young son, a call to a crucial mission puts their escape and the future of humanity on the line. The Great Flood centers on Anna and her son Jae-in as their everyday life gets brutally upended by a natural disaster of apocalyptic proportions. glimpses of a spacebound rocket and teases a strange mission from security officer Hee Jo in the film's official trailer below indicate didn't need to read that, indicate more sci-fi than meets the eye. The Great Flood was written and directed by Kim Boyoung-woo. Did the Terror live? There we go. Not a lot that I'll be interested in watching, but Sisu, I'll get around to that at some point. Moving on now to some more Welcome to Derry news. Funko toy line includes Periwinkle, Pickle Dad, and Bloody Pennywise. Your boy John Squires writes, Funko is paying tribute to several memorable moments and characters from the first season of Welcome to Derry with a brand new toy line that's being unveiled this week. The first wave of Welcome to Derry toys from Funko is now up for pre-order, with the toys expected to begin shipping out within the first couple of weeks of January 2026. The lineup includes Original Periwinkle, Little Periwinkle, and Periwinkle, the wife of original Pennywise performer Bob Gray, and his daughter as both a child and an adult. Bob Gray's Pennywise is also getting his own Funko toy, along with two versions of the blood-soaked Bloody Pennywise from the season 1 finale. And then there's Pickle Dad, its gruesome manifestation of Lily Bridges' deceased father. The memorable scene makes for one of the gnarlier Funko toys we've seen. Well, yeah, I mean, okay. Did the Periwinkle that was the wife of Bob Gray actually appear in the show? Did I miss that? I'm sure it's mentioned that Bob Gray's late wife was a Periwinkle, but then the child was taken on the mantle. But did it feature? Don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't get Funko Pops. But if you do, and you like collecting them, and you like it, there you go. You got a selection of new ones. It's like the boo-boo, don't get it. Anyway, some video game news. New difficulty mode is coming early 2026 for Chronos: The New Dawn. Mike Wilson writes, Bloob Team has announced a late Christmas gift for Chronos: The New Dawn players keen on checking out the game's world instead of focusing on avoiding the orphans. Launching in early 2026, the new Temporal Diver mode features a new difficulty that will have players take on a more explorative approach. Ooh. Mildly different from the existing game mode, the story with all its elements remains the same in Temporal Diver mode, with main changes happening to enemy and traveller health. In the Temporal Diver mode, enemy health will be halved, while travellers will be doubled. This will provide plenty of opportunities for a little smoother progression for those whose gameplay style is more story-orientated rather than die-hard action. That's not to say that this mode's a cakewalk, as the fast-paced action and all the elements of the game remain in place. Only the health will be adjusted in this mode, and after completing it, players are more than encouraged to replay it on the anvil of the collective standard difficulty for the full survival horror experience. The already existing hard mode, Forged in Fire mode, unlocks after completing the anvil of the collective walkthrough, and is currently the highest difficulty where players will go head first, guns blazing, and leave no orphans behind. I've heard decent things about Chronos: The New Dawn. I haven't seen enough footage that makes me go, oh, I really like the look of that. Like, you know, gloopy monsters, Resident Evil-y, you know. Not enough has sort of sold me to want to purchase it. But I've heard it's decent, and I liked Bloober Team's Silent Hill 2, which I've still not finished. So, you know. And also, I like easy mode. I like to play games with a story. I'm not very good at challenges. Next up, Guillermo del Toro's Mimic evolves onto 4K UHD with 2 cuts in February. Alex DiVincenzo writes, the sophomore film from visionary director Guillermo del Toro, Mimic, will be released on 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray on January 13th via Kino Lorber. Both the 106-minute theatrical version and the 112-minute director's cut have been newly restored in 4K, approved by Del Toro with Dolby Vision. In the 1997 sci-fi horror film, the battle between man and nature comes to life when a team of scientists discover a glitch in their miracle cure. With the power to mimic and destroy its every predator and the threat of an entire city's destruction, their creation has taken on a horrifying life of its own. The ever-growing weight of extinction on the shoulders forces the team to take matters into their own hands. I enjoy Mimic. It's one of those films that I have seen quite a few times over the years. I've never seen the director's cut. I'm pretty sure I've never seen the director's cut. I've never seen any of the sequels, but I generally enjoyed the film. I still don't necessarily understand how like kind of mutant cockroaches would solve a disease that was affecting the kids, because I think that was the initial setup, was there was this illness that was wiping out the kids, like kind of worse than polio. I wonder if I can't remember. As I say, I've seen the film a few times, and I still never really remember exactly what the purpose, why cockroaches, or these mutant bugs. But it's a good film. It's pretty gnarly in places, and the effects, haven't aged too bad. It's good. Now, this is interesting news. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 just hit 200 million and debuts at home before Christmas, John Squires writes. Heading into its third week of release, video game adaptation Five Nights at Freddy's 2 continues to reign supreme over the horror box office, hitting a milestone over the weekend. It's now hit $201.8 million at the worldwide box office, with $108.9 million of that being made in the United States. The film's reported production budget was somewhere between $36 and $50 million, so it's no doubt going to end up being massively profitable for the Universal Pictures and Blumhouse release. It's also proven to be review-proof, much like the first film. The current Rotten Tomatoes score is around 16% from 120 reviews. The score from users on Rotten Tomatoes is much higher, though, at 85%, suggesting that hardcore fans of the video game are enjoying the movie, while movie critics are finding it to be a lump of holiday coal. So this is something that I kind of discussed probably on the last show, is that reviews were terrible for Five Nights at Freddy's 2. And I wanted to know if anyone that's seen it, if they felt, yeah, the reviews are right, this is dog shit, or if it was a situation where it's being unfairly lambasted at the review stage. Because I actually quite enjoyed the first film. I had no interest in watching it because I wasn't that fussed with the franchise, and the reviews were mediocre. I actually had quite a good time with it, so it kind of looks like potentially that'll be the same case with part 2. It's doing well. It's doing well, and audience reviews are much higher. And then finally on the news, Full Moon announces 9 new productions, including Models vs. Werewolves and The Grim Rapper. Alex DiVincenzo writes, I know, I'm a bit of a hypocrite. I don't want to talk about an Asylum Films release, but I want to talk about Full Moon. But long-time listeners of the show will know I used to do a Full Moon review section, Full Moon retro review, before I kind of thought, why am I paying for this service when a lot of the films are terrible? Will I start paying for the service again? Probably not. Full Moon Features recently polled its fans to choose their upcoming productions, and the results are in. The studio's 2026 slate will include 9 new titles. In Models vs. Werewolves, 5 young models go to an Airbnb in the woods for a full moon that comes once every 500 years. What starts off as a perfect girls' trip quickly becomes a nightmare as a pack of ancient werewolves are awoken by the new moon. Fucking hell, there's quite a few here. The other titles, I can't be asked to read them all. Dungeon Dolls, The Grim Rapper, Terror Express, Buried Secrets, Lost Girl's Private Diary, Robotica, Sirens of Seduction, and Catacombs of Horror. There you go. Full Moon founder Joe Blow reports that Full Moon founder Charles Band will direct several of the movies, with others helmed by frequent collaborators like William Butler of Ginger Dead Man 2 and 3 fame, Chris Alexandra, Necropolis Legion, and Brooks Davis, the Gingerweed Man. He's hoping that the movies rely less on AI slop than the promotional artwork. Yeah, I mean, the promotional artwork does just look like your typical ChatGPT, give me some artwork sort of thing. And I would know. Yeah, okay. Does anyone sub to the Full Moon's channel? I mean, there's some decent stuff in there. I still think the Subspecies series, or at least the first 2 that I've seen, are good. Yeah, there's also a lot of absolute piss in there. And anyway, that is it for the horror news. We're going to move swiftly on to the reviews, starting with influencers. Influences being a 2025 horror thriller film written, directed, produced, and edited by Curtis David Harder. It's the sequel to the film Influencer, starring Cassandra Nord and Emily Tennant reprising their roles from the first film, being joined by Georgina Campbell, Lisa Delamar, Jonathan Whitesell, Veronica Long, and Dylan Playfair in supporting roles. Okay, so with our reviews on the channel, what we do is talk a little bit about the plot without going into real spoiler territory. Talk about the highs, lows, things that I enjoyed, didn't enjoy, and then I'll give you a score out of 10. As with all the reviews, this is just my opinion. As a horror fan, you may well have a different opinion, and that's great. Let me know your thoughts if you agree or disagree. Be sure to follow the channel on all the on all the various platforms, and of course Patreon. Support us on Patreon. Shout out to Patreon supporters, the Gruff, James, and Bericles. Love you guys. And I'm in talks with the Gruff about arranging to come back on the show. He's a long-time patron, long-time fan of the show. He's been on quite a few entries in the past, so we are well overdue getting a Gruff episode back. Watch this space. Okay, influencers. So here's a little bit about the plot. A woman is seen in her luxury house, distraught by unseen notifications on her phone before slitting her own throat. In southern France, CW, having escaped from Thailand and started a new life, and her girlfriend Diane are celebrating their first couple's birthday. CW becomes frustrated by influencer Charlotte, who took their top hotel room at the last minute and kept asking the couple to attend various events, to the point CW kills Charlotte and impersonates her on social media. I mean, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the film straight away. So, whereas the previous film, Madison, the previous film star, Madison, is who we're focusing on, and we're following their journey and the allure of the character CW, beautiful brunette woman who has a large birthmark on her cheek, who would basically, I guess, be a bit of a parasite to influencers. There'd be like this, almost like a leech to them, but then taken over, and this murderous side, and then hiding the murders through social media posts, or taking on their personality to, I guess, stave off them being looked into as a disappearance. The first film worked if you stuck with it to the end. Initially, I was thinking this is quite a boring sort of thriller in terms of, I can see where this is going. Yeah, it's all glitz and kind of glamour, but clearly CW is looking to infiltrate and manipulate Madison and take over. But then it got to the finale. Finale made me a fan. Like, I still think Influencer, I can't remember what score I gave it, but I have a feeling it would have been like a 6.5. Around about there. But the ending was what saved the film for me. Influencers, I do think, is stronger. Do I necessarily think it's a better film? Possibly not. But do I think that the groundwork laid in Influencer established more interest straight off the bat in Influencers? Yeah, for sure. And in this one, we are following CW much more closely. She is almost to an extent, our anti-hero. But as mentioned earlier on, Madison also returns. And a lot of people are looking at Madison as being a bit of a bad person. They are the prime suspect in the murder of the boyfriend and other people that CW had killed. So she's sort of trying to balance getting the word out about this murderous woman who apparently is still alive after the shocking ending to the first film, and along with the whole trial by public jury of guilty until proven innocent. So that's quite a nice contrast between the two characters, and where we are following CW, they're sort of our anti-hero, but then quite quickly the murderous side does come out, and the self-preservation of it all is very prevalent in this film. If the shockingness of the ending in part one, or the first film I should say, is not really part one, part two, worked because it was quite a contrast to the first half of the film, or the first two acts of the film. In this, it has a shocking finale again, but it is more batshit crazy. I'm not talking outlandish, I'm not talking supernatural or anything like that, but it's things ramp up rapidly, but they all work in the context of the story. Nothing feels like, whoa, okay, we're now jumping the shark. It all connects well. It all makes sense to me, anyway. Cassandra Nord is again excellent in this. I think I'd be interested to see what kind of role she goes on to after this, because she really is a standout. She really does have this allure where you both find her interesting but also terrifying because of how she can flip like that, in terms of murderous intent. There's really there's really a sadistic side in there, as we find when she kills Charlotte at the start of the film. It's she sort of then goes down when Charlotte's still mangled but alive and seems to be enjoying it. It's really dark and macabre, and I realise I haven't put the poster on the channel there. In terms of negatives, I wouldn't necessarily say there's any negatives. I mean, the setting, the locale, does feel quite similar to Influencer, and I guess it is that whole kind of world of these different people. The hardcore streamers and social media influencers at a high level, where there is a bit of a vapid attention-seeking side to the characters. So there's not really anyone other than Madison that you can, not necessarily that you can root for, but that you can relate to. With Madison, she becomes more relatable because we saw her experience in the first film. But it's just that whole subculture does make it difficult to connect with any of the characters in a meaningful way. And root for those to overcome the odds or mourn those who meet a tragic end. It's just an unfortunate situation with that world. Unless you love influencers, then great, you'll be well in. I think out of 10, I think I'm going to have to give it a solid 7. It's a decent film, and the finale is great. Cassandra Nord is brilliant again in this. I think the only things that sort of just knock it down is it's just it's similar to the first film. It's just that world. I'm not that interested in the world of those vapid, like obsessed individuals. I know obviously that's a little bit, this show is content. It goes out as content. I have the TikTok where I record talking piece segments and whatever, and that's all content and blah blah blah. And I get that could look hypocritical, but I don't consider myself a content creator in that way, of like the sort where they're just on all the time, because it's constantly about ensuring you have hundreds of thousands of blah blah blah, and your job is that. So a 7 out of 10 for Influencers. It's decent. We're now going to look at, of course, Welcome to Derry, the TV event of the winter. Welcome to Derry is an American supernatural horror television series based on the 1986 novel It, serving as a prequel to the films It and It Chapter 2, developed by Andy Muschietti, Barbara Muschietti, and Jason Fuchs, all of whom were involved in the It films. Series stars Taylor Page, Joe Van Adepo, Chris Chalk, James Remar, Stephen Ryder, Clara Stack, Amanda Christine, and Mikhail Karim Fidler, with, of course, Bill Skarsgård reprising his role as Pennywise from the films and serving as an executive producer on the series. So, we haven't really ever done many TV series reviews on here. I mean, horror TV is something that it lands every so often. I mean, I saw the first 2 seasons of From. It was good, but I had the concerns of, are we just going to keep asking questions without giving any answers? Is it going to become the new Lost? And of course there was Supernatural, which I did give up on around the season 10 or 11 mark, or 13 maybe. I didn't stick to the end because it just got a bit too much and a bit boring. But we've not that long ago had Alien Earth, which I can't remember if I viewed on the channel. It very much, I might have discussed it, but it was very much for me a 7 out of 10. Opening episodes were great, flashback episode was great. As it went on, I was watching it each week. I enjoyed returning to that format of, oh, it's a Monday, let's watch the new episode of Alien Earth, or whatever day it was on. But some of the characters and the overall story direction, I don't know. It didn't tick all the boxes for me. That was very much a 7 out of 10 series. But I was always going to watch this when it came along because I'm a huge Stephen King fan. It was the VHS artwork of the 1990 release was what interested me first in Stephen King. Then read the book, my first ever horror novel. Probably read it a bit too early. I had to return to it many years later because I didn't finish it at the time because it's like a 1,000-page novel. But when this was announced, I was a big fan of the first film. The second film, I'll talk about my thoughts on a bit later on. But I was very interested to see how this was going to work. Now, people that don't know, the novel It follows 2 time periods predominantly, 1950-something and then 1986, I believe. 27-year gap. So, 1959, 1986, something like that. They changed the time slightly for the film, so it was like 1980 something, then 2016, like 1985, 2016, whatever the time difference is. Those are the periods. 1989, 2016, something like that. But the novel, there is a rich history going back a long time. Like Mike Hanlon in the book is like kind of the historian, and he would always be going back and looking, doing research. There's key moments like the fire at the Black Spot, the shootout of the Bradley gang, a number of events in the history of the town of Derry, which preclude the cycle of 27 years when this interdimensional primordial evil from the Macroverse that crash landed on Earth, would come out of hibernation, and there'd be a catastrophic event that would start the cycle. He would then feed on, terrify, creating fear as a salting of the meat, and murder and eat kids. Before then, a catastrophic event would a big event would lead to a lot of death and would lead to him sort of going back into hibernation. So you've got rich history there, and this looks back at the period before the Losers Club in the 1980s of the Chapter 1 film. So, we'll just sort of say the premise is in 1962, a couple with their son move to Derry, Maine, just as a young boy disappears. With their arrival, bad things begin to happen in the town. So we're introduced to a new kind of de facto Losers Club in the first episode. They're the kids that are on all the promotional materials, and by the very end of that first episode, over half of them get ripped apart in front of us, or at least we're led to believe half of them have just been killed, and we see at least 2 of them get just ripped up. It's uber violent, like they're pulling no punches in that regard in this series. So straight away you're sort of thinking, okay, right, okay, so who's the new Losers Club in this, or the old Losers Club? Like, what's happening? At the same point, there's a storyline involving James Remar's character as who is it? He is playing on the list as Francis Shaw, a superior officer at the U.S. Air Force, Lieutenant General. He is leading over a number of characters: Leroy Hanlon, Mike Hanlon's grandfather, father of Will, who is Mike Hanlon's dad, and also, where is he on the cast list? Chris Chalk playing Dick Halloran. Now, Dick Halloran's a name that people may know from The Shining, and also Doctor Sleep, because in the novels he doesn't die, but in the Kubrick film he does. He gets an axe to the chest. He does feature in It very, very briefly in the novel. He is at the Black Spot, but in here they have expanded his role massively. So essentially with the series, we've got kind of 2 storylines converging. There's the kids who one of their friends goes missing, which then leads them to start, looking into what is going on, what is killing the friends. And then you've also got the adults. So we're sort of almost doing like the films, but at once, where we're focusing on the adults, but also the kids, except it's not the adult counterparts of the kids when they're grown up. And the adults, the Air Force, are looking to try and locate this primordial evil, because of an instance that happened when the Lieutenant General Francis Shaw was a child. As it goes on from there, other things happen. Watch the show if you want like the full details. I won't do kind of full spoilers now, but that's kind of the gist of it. What I will say is the CGI is shonky in times. The CGI in the films in Chapter 2, I don't really think the CGI was much of a problem in Chapter 1, but the CGI in Chapter 2, couple of moments a bit shonky, right? Just a couple of moments, I would say, like when Pennywise is in the school and his head's on fire, and just like also attacking as Mrs. Kirsch. There's a couple of moments where the CGI is a bit shonky, and also the spider Pennywise at the end. But in this series, episode 2 with the ghosts in the graveyard, CGI was pretty crappy there. But it does a really good job of building up the anticipation for Pennywise, because the focus isn't straight away on Pennywise is hunting these kids. It is taking an approach which I think gets masked over a bit later in the season, which is it takes a form of Pennywise because that's one of its favoured forms, because it's easier to lure in kids as a clown. But it ultimately will focus on your fear to terrify you the most, because that is like salting the meat, it's seasoning the meat, which is very grim. And in the opening few episodes where we don't have any Pennywise, we do have instances where not Marge Truman, not Veronica Groman, Lily Bainbridge. Her father has previously died, and there's a bit of a stigma around that, where she is seeing a version of her father all sliced up in a jar of pickles. There's Ronnie Grogan seeing a pregnant woman that's like all just distorted and horrifying, and there's moments where the fear is coming from these different instances, these different things appearing to the characters. And it's one of those things where that works really well at also building up the anticipation to see Pennywise, because of course we're watching an It series. We know Bill Skarsgård is back portraying Pennywise. Of course people want to see Pennywise. It's a great introduction. He is amazing in this show. But we do also almost lose at that point to an extent, the using other forms, because it does then become it's always as Pennywise. It makes sense from a TV film narrative perspective, but obviously in contrast to the novel, yada yada yada. I, as a reader, I don't have any issues really with the liberties taken here, because it is telling a new story. We are bleeding in this show into the fire at the Black Spot, and that is gnarly as fuck. But at the same point, we are building up more of the backstory that was established in It Chapter 2 of the local tribe who have encountered it. I like that, because America doesn't have a very long history, but then the Native Americans will have from prior to colonization. So featuring that a bit more in this makes sense. I get that, kind of as it did in the second film. Building up the lore around that, and also introducing Bob Gray. Now, in the book, Bob Gray is noted as Pennywise's real name, but Pennywise is just an appearance. What the series does, which I thought was quite interesting, is okay, well, we've done in the films, I think mainly It Chapter 2, but potentially in Chapter 1 as well, we've done in the films this little peppering in of a Bob Gray, kind of a little nod to the novel. In this instance, who's to say Bob Gray wasn't an actual person? And the way that is done is actually quite nice. Now, it does throw in some continuity errors of when they're looking at the history in It Chapter 1. They're establishing that, Pennywise wasn't Pennywise the clown until 1908 when it encountered Bob Gray and decided, kids seem to like you. I'm going to eat you and take your form. So there's some continuity errors there, but whatever, who cares? We also get introduced to Periwinkle, which is a nice little addition where the real life Bob Gray was a clown, had a wife who was a periwinkle who passed away unfortunately, but also had a daughter who's going to become the new periwinkle, who's enamoured by her father. Now, yes, you could argue, how deranged would you have to be to think that when your father's disappeared and presumed dead that he would keep reappearing every 27 years eating kids, and then of course that's your dad. He just has a penchant for eating kids now. It's you have to take some liberties, but grief and mental illness can combine to blind you to rationale, and there's all those things going on there. Fine, not a problem with it. I dug this throughout. I thought the finale was great. I thought the torment Dick Halloran goes through in this was great, and Chris Chalk was brilliant as Dick Halloran. I think he was probably the real standout alongside the kids in this, and of course alongside Bill Skarsgård, who's excellent in this again. It was a great finale. It really was. And the return of a particular character, I won't mention because, what happens to them happens quite late in the show. It was really, really well done. And if you've seen social media, the scene may well have been spoiled for you already, but the return of a particular character to aid in the quest was done brilliantly. Some great shots in this. Overall, I had a great time with this show. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than Alien Earth. I do think what it comes down to, though, is depending on how much you love the book. If you're a stickler for accurate adaptation, then you're probably not going to enjoy this. And there's probably things in the films that you didn't enjoy, various adaptations. Thing is, with the It novel, there are a number of things that are just unadaptable. Ritual of Chud, the scene after the first fight with Pennywise, because that should never have been written at all. Some of the deaths in the book are just like terrifying, and to put that on screen would just be like, how? And also it's very noted for its finale. Some people hate the finale in the book. How it's dealt with in the various iterations is something we'll talk about shortly. But I kind of feel that if you're not going to hold on too tightly to what happens in an original release, like the original book, then you'll have a great time with this. I can understand when something comes along and gets adapted, if certain characters are changed massively. So, I think that it's understandable if you've read the book and you go, oh yeah, I really liked the dynamic between the group. I really like this character in particular. They really vibed with me. I really, really dug it. It was great. And then an adaptation comes along, and either that character is completely omitted. Their character traits are combined with another's, so that character is a combination of these two characters, or they're completely omitted, or their personification is massively changed. That I think is understandable, because it's just like, what the hell have they done to this person? If there are certain key scenes, like not just a case of their moments in the book, but this is a pivotal moment in the story and it's completely changed, then okay, fine. But generally the films did a couple of their own things, but tried to follow certain beats, and did what they did with the finale, which I think was just a bit of a poison chalice, on reflection. But the roundabout point of this is we've got a show here that is trying to do a faithful enough adaptation of a period in the book which predates, the current activities or the first timeline of activities, by covering those items, but then also adding in a rich world around it and creating a bit more of its own lore. The storyline with the Air Force goes in some weird directions, and I think if I was being more critical, I'd have rolled my eyes a bit at the progression of that storyline. but I was just along for the ride. I just really enjoyed this on a week-to-week basis. I'm going to give it Welcome to Derry 8.5 out of 10. I don't think it's a 9. I didn't think it was like mind-blowingly high quality because, as I say, it's doing some interesting things. Some okay, and also the CGI at times. Like, I'm not really. I prefer practical effects over CGI, but I understand the cost effect of it. It's just some of the CGI moments I did think like, oh god, that looked a bit crappy. I always reference it when I think of Andy Muschietti back to the finale of Mama. Mama was a great, tense little horror film. And it got near the end, and we saw more of Mama, who was also sort of represented in It Chapter 1 as the flute-playing lady, the sort of distorted head. The more you saw of it, the more it was like, I get how that look is creepy. It's a face that doesn't look like a face should, but it also looks very CGI. So 8.5 out of 10 for It Welcome to Derry. Let's now move on to our featured presentation. Of course, we're talking about your boy Pennywise, and I've got that image on the back of my hoodie. Primark, baby. So, with the release of It Welcome to Derry, which will hopefully be getting a season 2 and 3 to round out the story, we have had our latest iteration, or continued iteration, of Pennywise on the big screen. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Pennywise is, as mentioned a moment ago, the favoured form of what is known as It, because it's a thing. It's this trans-dimensional evil entity from the Macroverse. Its essential form is what's known as the Deadlights, which, when looked into, basically cause like mania and death. Kind of a combination of also seeing its deadlights and also seeing its true form, which the closest thing that the human mind can appropriate it to is a giant spider. But that's where the Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft influence comes in, seeing something that the mind can just not comprehend. That's the closest thing that can be depicted. But essentially, it isn't an alien clown. It takes that form to lure in the kids, because it likes to eat the kids. Kids are easier to scare than adults because kids have an imagination, and it can see what scares them, and it hones in on that. The idea being is that a clown can lure in a kid before then terrifying them. And obviously with the Bill Skarsgård interpretation in the Andy Muschietti films, I think that's, while I do like Bill Skarsgård in that, and I like his depiction of Pennywise, I do also think that it sort of it veers a little bit more straight off the bat in the creepy demonic clown realm, rather than, hey, I'm a happy clown. Actually, I'm fucking evil. And that's one of the things that I did like about the Tim Curry iteration, is that he can have the happy, jovial smile, but then it can turn into a terrifying sneer very quickly. And that's the when I read the book, that's what I kind of envisage. Now, Pennywise in the book takes a number of different forms. There's the general form with the orange pom-pommy things on its front, along with its Bozo the Clown red hair and the big red lipstick. I do feel that was represented, most faithfully in the 1990 adaptation. There's also this whole thing of its eyes being like silver dollars. That's something which was not really featured in the Andy Muschietti releases. There's the whole its eyes changing to yellow. There's like the yellowy orangey look, which is kind of when it's going into feast mode or attack mode. But it has got the jagged teeth when it's in feed mode, and there's a really horrible image on screen at the moment in the top right, which is from, I believe it's the death of Patrick Hockstetter in the book. That's a horrible scene, absolutely horrifying. But in the book, it's one of the things that it stands out because it's a killer clown. It's something that stands out. But in the book, it doesn't that often actually feature as the clown. They don't really, from memory, it's been a while since I've read the book, actually fight it properly in its clown guise. Like, they have some interactions with it. But a big moment is when they fight it in its werewolf form, teenage werewolf, in the house on Neibolt Street. There's also the two fights in the sewers with it as its, closest to the mind can comprehend appearance of a giant spider, which is, I do think it works well in the book, especially when it bites off Eddie's arm. It's a horrifying moment. But because the idea of this jokey, ridiculous clown that was also terrifying with razor blade teeth and, will just like eat the heart out through the armpit of a recently battered individual, is one of those things where that becomes the form that people will latch onto, of course, because it's iconic, and you want to feature that as much as possible. But in the novel, it there's moments where it initially looks like a clown walking against the wind on an icy lake, but then actually the head looks to be that of an Egyptian mummy from like the Mummy horror films. And how are the balloons not blowing in the wind? And all these moments of what I'm seeing, how is that even possible? It defies logic, it defies reality, and that is it. Yeah, I mean, it's like most things. If you want the scariest iteration, you have to go to the book, because the initial introduction with chatting to Georgie, I'm a clown in the drain, the circus got blown down here. He's been all jovial before ripping the kid's arm off. The instances, as I said, at Neibolt Street, creepy as anything. But there's also the areas that, even when you read in the book, don't necessarily, they make sense in the overall context of the story. But if you try and visualize it, even in your head, it's like, how does that work? And that is predominantly how the kids and then the adults fight it, which is the ritual of Chud, which is a ritual that Maturin, the cosmic turtle, teaches Bill, stuttering Bill, in that it's kind of a battle of wills where you both bite down on each other's tongue while flying through space. And it's this battle of wills, and that's the only way to defeat it. It works in the whole trans-dimensional world of things, but there is a reason why it wasn't ever properly adapted. They did a version in the later film, which we'll talk about, but that is really how it happened in the book. And they have this fight with a giant spider, initially as kids, then as adults. They defeat it before realizing it's pregnant, so it has a bit of a female biology or a unisex biology, but its death causes the destruction of the town of Derry. Big cataclysmic event. How does all that get transposed into the various adaptations? Well, of course, we started off in 1990 with Tim Curry's Pennywise and Tommy Lee Wallace's adaptation, made for TV miniseries. Now, it's possible, because that was the first image I ever saw of Pennywise the Clown, that instantly when I was reading the book, that is what I was picturing. But it does feel as though that is a very close representation on screen, the Tim Curry version, as it's written in the book. Now, in terms of some key scenes, there's the moment of an attack in the showers. There's it appearing as a werewolf. We don't really have the house on Neibolt Street here. I mean, there is a particular moment with Stanley where he goes into a house and he encounters the mummy, but is that the house on Neibolt Street? I don't really know. Silver, the bike, does play a more prominent role in this, I would say. And also, we have the spider at the end. But it does the cinematic approach, which was also taken with the later films. In that, in the book, you jump between time periods regularly. We are encountering situations, events occurring in the 1950s when they are the Losers Club of kids, and how they then come together and how they then encounter it and fight it and whatnot, and Henry Bowers, etc. But we're also jumping between the present. There's the 7 phone calls, 7 phone calls, where each character is, as an adult, getting the phone call from Mike Hanlon and then remembering for the first time in a long time about Derry and about what happened, and then being terrified about what they grew up through and their promise of returning. In the mini-series, we have our first film, which is focusing on the kids, predominantly. I think in the miniseries there's a bit of jumping back and forth, a little bit, but we're predominantly focusing on the kids' storyline. And then in the second episode, or the second half, it's focusing on the adults' storyline. And whilst narratively I think that makes sense, it does also automatically split it between, well, the first part's better than the second, because the Losers Club as kids were more endearing and what they overcome and the things that they have to fight, whereas when it's the adults, Pennywise is almost more just trying to scare them off, partially because it's afraid, because that was the only time it's ever been hurt, is when it fought them as kids, but also it's preying on the fact that they've got all this childhood trauma that they'd forgotten about from being away from Derry, because there's this whole magical kind of thing of when you leave, you forget. And so it's using that to ramp up these scares. But they're just scared. They're never really in peril, other than with instances with Henry Bowers, and then, later on when they go back down into the sewers to fight it. That is one of the shortcomings. That's one area. The other area for the 1990 release is, because of it being made for television, it was really restricted in what they could do. They couldn't show, high degrees of blood, victims bleeding, attacks, special effects, corpses. They couldn't do it on TV. That was an issue, and also because obviously it's targeting kids, and especially in that time, kids getting offed on screen was just a huge no-no. So it had that kind of limitation, but the fact is it also had the great performance of Tim Curry, who became instantly iconic and nightmare fuel as Pennywise. So that worked well. They did the best that they could with the limitations that they had. But it then did lead us into, because of those difficulties of what you can adapt, especially the ritual etude, how do you then explain something that's been mainly appearing as a clown throughout most of the film, occasionally appearing as werewolf, mummy, a few other things, just to show that it can take the appearance of what you fear, but again, predominantly you're seeing it as a clown. And underneath the clown guys, there's the moment with the glove comes off and it's got like an alien sort of looking hand to show that it's not really a clown. There's no explanation when they suddenly walk into a cave and it's there as a giant spider. Obviously, when you're reading a book, you're getting subtext, you're getting explanations of why these things are, and how do you portray that on screen. I don't think it was able to do a good enough job of why is it now a giant spider. As much as I think the spider looked pretty good, and it's that is essentially how it appears in the book, right? I mean, obviously it moves around a lot more around the ceiling. They couldn't do that because of, again, budgetary reasons. But ultimately, it does cover quite a lot of the bases. We've got his Bill's wife, Audra, following him to Derry and then getting caught up in the crosshairs to an extent. So it's a fairly faithful adaptation to the book, but with a lot of limitations and a lot that just couldn't be adapted, right? But on the whole, I do enjoy creepy Tim Curry as Pennywise, and he is the Pennywise that I think looks most like the novel. When we then come across Pennywise 2017, in cinematic form, no holds barred, really. He bites off Georgie's arm, and you see Georgie with his arm missing, and Georgie, in that storyline, isn't found deceased. He's gone. So his arm has been ripped off, but then he is pulled into the drain, which gives a bit more of a story for why Bill is trying to find his brother. It's not just a case of the guilt of staying in while his brother went out to play. It's also a case of, maybe he is down there, maybe he's still around. But we've got more of the foul language, which we didn't have in the 1990s. We've got a lot more of the gore ramped up in Chapter 2. It bites off the face of a kid, and it also smashes its head through glass and eats a kid basically whole. It's uber violent in Chapter 1 and 2. We are seeing the leper outside of Neibolt Street. Neibolt Street factors in a bit more. We're not really seeing the werewolf, but there is a moment in a fight with Pennywise where it's sort of transformed into a werewolf. It has the werewolf claws, which it slashes at Ben. It is Chapter 1, I would say, is quite a fairly faithful adaptation where possible. Of course, in that we get just a little bit of a brief moment of the history. We get some Easter eggs like the mural on the wall of the Bradley gang. Things that just a lot more peppered in that the 1990 release couldn't have. We see it tormenting Bill using like a vision of Georgie as like a dead marionette. It's beefing up the torment side of things quite a bit in this. The appearance has changed, yes, but I get that, from watching documentaries, that's based on Andy Muschietti's sketch of what he thinks a creepy clown would look like. But I do think in Chapter 1 we've got the use of the leper, Pennywise. What else does it appear as? The creepy lady. So there's a few more liberties taken of introducing a fear for Stan. Now, what I do like in this is it added a reason for Stan potentially making the decision he makes as an adult. Again, we're splitting the story. Chapter 1 is focusing entirely on the kid storyline. Chapter 2 is focusing on the adults, but they do also... Chapter 2 knew Chapter 1 was successful, so it would feature then these kind of flashback sequences for how they would remember. But it featured a scene of where Stanley looked like he'd almost get his face eaten off, and he came the closest to dying. So therefore, well, when you remember as an adult, you would instantly think of that moment when you almost were eaten. So of course you'd be terrified to that extent. It does a good job overall of mixing in old and new, and it was wildly successful. We then get It Chapter 2, which opens with the Adrian Mellon murder. Adrian Mellon murder, which wasn't featured in the 1990 miniseries. It's a pretty hard watch because it's pretty much like what happens in the book, and it's a hard chapter to read because it's just nasty. But we then get more of a desperation from Mike Hanlon, who stayed behind as the librarian, the light keep watcher, where he has found a way to fight it by the ritual of Chud, which isn't the ritual in the book, but I get why they do that, which then results in him lying to the gang, and it's all done quite well, but again, we're taking more of the liberties with the source material to do our own thing. Okay, fine. The Ritual of Chud, I liked trying to add that, although you just couldn't film it as per the book. I like the fact that, yes, Maturin is quite a featured presence at times in the book, this cosmic turtle entity. You can't do that in a series or a film, so instead they feature, like a toy turtle here and there, turtles appearing at certain moments to kind of show the presence of it being around without, it's more of an Easter egg nog for those that know, but it's just a nice little thing in there. It doesn't play too pivotal into the story, but it's a nice little moment. Which then kind of leads us into It Chapter 2, right? Now, I hadn't watched it for a little while because I always remember thinking Chapter 1 was great, Chapter 2 was a bit arse. On reflection, really, Chapter 2 is pretty good. It is just how they defeat it that I had a problem with. And on rewatch, I do understand the approach a bit more, but I still think it was kind of crappy, just using harsh words to make it feel small. Like, I liked the fact that they did try to use the spider imagery to an extent, but they also played into the fact that people don't want to suddenly have a big fight at the end and then not have Pennywise. Now, as I say, in the novel, they don't actually ever really fight Pennywise. They fight it as a werewolf, they fight it as a spider as kids, then as an adult as kids. Whereas in It Chapter 1, they fought it as Pennywise, and that was a great moment. In Chapter 2, they kind of almost had to play into the fact that, okay, well, we're bringing a bit more about its history, how it crashed to Earth, a bit more of that background. We need to maybe feature a bit of this spider element, but people still want to see them fight Pennywise. So then we end up with this extended, armed, daggered-legged, but in clown dress up with a big bulbous head Pennywise. It looked a bit silly. I mean, there's a good moment when Richie is attacking it and then it suddenly opens up the dead lights and causes Richie to float. That was a great moment visually, but just, I kind of think you either go all in on one or the other. Like, they knew that they'd be seeing, there's dialogue talking about, it's seeing its real form, and there's the flashbacky sort of scene of it's kind of as a bird or whatever. But I kind of feel like you either show it in its true form and go all in on the spider, maybe take out the dialogue because a talking spider would be a bit ridiculous, but whatever, or use it to talk in their mind as opposed to verbally, whatever. There's ways and means of doing it. Or you just go back and have them fight Pennywise again. So, yeah. I mean, it still ended up with Pennywise's heart being taken out as per the novel and as per the 1990 adaptation, but that was only after berating it to come down into human height and then down to like a tiny baby thing that doesn't like being spoken down to and called mean words. There's things to like with both adaptations, and by today's standards, if you've only ever seen the It movies, if you then go to watch the 1990 miniseries, you'd think, what the fuck? Why were people scared of this? Why did it terrify people? But the fact is, one, it's a different time. Two, you don't get those sort of made-for-TV films like that anymore that have that kind of charm where, yes, they're limited on what they can show and foul language and violence, but there's also more practical effects, more focus on creating actual scares as opposed to jump scares. So, which was your favourite Pennywise? Are you very much the novel is the best, nothing comes close to the novel? Are you Tim Curry's my Pennywise, he's the OG? Or are you a Bill Skarsgård's your Pennywise? I think for me, change the ending to Chapter 2. Have the appearance of Tim Curry's Pennywise. Maybe it's Bill Skarsgård playing it. I think Bill Skarsgård's performance is great, but I do just think part of the Pennywise terror is this. He could look like a happy clown at the circus, and then there's this macabre terror there when things just change. The appearance changes, and you don't get that with the Skarsgård Pennywise because he just looks creepy and alien straight off the bat. That's it for another Ministry of Horror. Probably, potentially the last one, 2025. We shall see. Be sure to follow on socials: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, to an extent. Follow the podcast on podcast platforms: Spotify Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. Check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Ministry of Horror. Be a follower. Support the channel. We love you guys. Shout out again to Gruff, James, and Pericles. And that's it for another show. If we do another show in 2025, maybe it'll be the Culties. Not the Culties, that's the Cultaholic show. Maybe it'll be the Ghoulies. But that might be a first week of 2026. We shall see. Anyway, thanks for watching or listening, and I'll catch you guys later. Goodbye.